Who are you? So you have a book in your hand.
I do have a book in my hand, amazingly.
Welcome to Podtech.
Oh, my pleasure.
And who are you?
I am Tim Ferriss, and
now you could say you're a New York Times best-selling author, right?
Out of nowhere, I know, totally unexpected, but as of last week, New York Times.
The book's only been out a week, hasn't it?
I know, the book, actually what's crazy about it is that was on 4 days, so the first 4 days of sales, and Amazon, no one expected it to do well, so they ran out of stock and only reported 1/3 of their sales. So
yep.
It's definitely been a huge pressure lifted off of my shoulders, but off to the races. It's what I wanted to happen, and didn't really expect it to happen this quickly. But
well, congrats.
Thanks.
What was the secret for the book getting so popular so fast?
You know,
because you only talk to bloggers, right? I wrote down
yeah,
on my blog.
No. It's there was no offline PR or advertising, and I think the secret was, if there's a secret.
You didn't do that radio show tour yet?
I just did last week. I just did at the end of last week.
But the first 4 days were
everything
before that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I spent 6 months really trying to learn about new media, and I've been getting emails and phone calls from authors now saying, like, what's the secret to pitching bloggers? And I'm like, well, I didn't really pitch anyone, so to speak.
You just hung out with
I just hung out. I just hung out, and if I asked a lot of questions, because I'm actually interested in what a lot of people are writing about. And if someone said WordPress and I didn't know what it was, I would ask them, well, what's WordPress? And at the risk of looking like an idiot. But as a result of asking all those questions, my learning curve was really steep, and had a lot of fun in the process. And didn't try to force anything down anybody's throats. Just asked a lot of questions, and
yeah.
That was it. And I mean, the secret was, I think, just focusing on getting the message out that I wanted to get out, as opposed to selling books. So I, on my own dime, sent out hundreds of copies to friends and family and people I thought would find it of interest, and just crossed my fingers and hoped for the best. But there was a lot of planning involved, but I felt like the top-down, Oprah will tell her minions what to buy approach just really wasn't the right approach at all for me. So.
Well, it's working out.
Yeah, it's working out pretty well.
So, what the hell is your book about?
What the hell is my book about? So,
the 4-hour work week.
Yeah, so the 4-hour work week.
I don't believe that you work only 4 hours a week.
So the 4-hour work week, right, minus the book launch period of my life. The 4-hour work week is, it's based on guest lectures that I've given at Princeton since 2003, and really discusses how there are three currencies in the digital world. So you have time, income, and mobility. And what I realized, especially coming out of Princeton, you have people from 30 majors funneled into either investment banking or management consulting. And the 80-hour, 90-hour, 100-hour work weeks doing something that really isn't exciting to you just isn't very sustainable. And the practical value of your money, if you don't have any time, is more or less nil. So in mid-2004, I reached my personal breaking point with the sort of hours in, income out model, and went to London to ostensibly decompress for 4 weeks, stayed with a friend of mine, promptly had a nervous breakdown the first day because I was trying to limit my email intake to once per week, which was a really hard process after checking it 100 times a day. And as soon as I realized that, for example, you didn't have to, in my case, if I really focused on developing processes instead of having an owner-driven business, I didn't have to check email 100 times a day. Yeah. I ended up traveling for 15 months and through about 20 countries, and testing these assumptions that I had about work life and career and the deferred life plan, so to speak. Where, I mean, you're an example of somebody who does what they love and what excites them.
Yeah, I wrote on my blog today that I'm doing 4-hour work week just by redefining what work is.
No, exactly. No, and it's true.
Work to me is like a roofer in Mexico City.
No, exactly. Yeah. No, it's true because
I don't do work like that.
Yeah, no, and the book isn't about being idle. It's about spending time on what is exciting and fulfilling for you. And what most people do, and I was on this path, is they say, well, I'm going to work 20 to 30 years doing X, which has high financial reward, but low personal reward, and then I'll do what I like. And that retirement-based model really doesn't work very well. I mean, I'm sure you've met people like this, but I have friends who have sold companies for $480 million. A friend of mine just part of Right Media, just he's done pretty well. But when you take away work, you have this void, and most people don't think about how they're going to fill that. So, my proposal, I suppose, is that you take this traditional retirement and try to redistribute it throughout life, and really take a novel approach to leveraging time and mobility, because there really are some very cool options available to people that have only become viable in the last few years. And people say, well, is that because of new technology? And to a large extent it is, but it's not like you and I didn't have Skype a few years ago.
Right.
But people in India might not have had Skype a few years ago.
Oh,
so
or didn't have a cell phone, or didn't have a
right.
computer.
No, exactly. So now you have this.
I heard that something like 1 billion people this year are going to get a cell phone and are going to join the internet for the first time.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's not so much that we as Americans in a digital culture are just getting these amazing new tools, although that's sometimes the case. It's that everyone else in the world is getting these tools. So suddenly the reach and the scale of what we can do is just enormous. So I remember, so one of the chapters is outsourcing your life, right? And so I met AJ Jacobs, who's the editor-at-large of Esquire, and he had done this experiment where he outsourced pretty much all of his life to India. And I met people who were doing things like that when I was traveling, and it wasn't just to India. It was in the U.S., it was to the Philippines, Canada. But
now explain what you mean by outsourcing.
Okay.
Was he outsourcing his email answering and his? I mean,
right.
Tell me what
Sure.
what kind of person he was before he outsourced it.
No, so AJ is a very smart guy, and he's not counterculture, but he likes doing these life experiments where. So he just, I'll come back to the outsourcing in a second, but his new book is about living biblically for a year. So he tried to follow every rule in the Bible for a year. And he does these little experiments.
A little obsessive, is he?
Oh, well, it makes two of us, right? So outsourcing your life, he started with responding to email. He started with the usual suspects, and then very quickly moved into having them, seeing how far he could push it. So having them send emails to his boss, or to try to mediate arguments between his wife and himself, or he had one person in India read bedtime stories to his children, just to see how far he could push it. And it's not like he kept on doing that, but just to see what the limits were, and there were very few limits. So one thing that I did recently, just to really settle a bet with a friend of mine, because we were having some wine. It's Northern California, right? And he said, well, there's some limits to what you can outsource. And I was like, well, like what? And he said, well, you can't outsource your dating. You have to put in the FaceTime. And I said, all right, well, I think I could outsource my dating. So I did that for all of April. I basically had these teams all over the world who were assigned Match.com or Yahoo Personals, and they had to set me dates on an online calendar. And it was amazing. I mean, it actually worked. And so now, does the average person want to do that? No. But if you're making, let's say you make $50,000 a year, right? Yeah. So you take chop off the 3 zeros and you cut that in half, so you make $25 an hour. Well, if you can pay anyone, that could be the kid down the street or someone in Bangalore, to do a time-consuming task for you for $12.50, I mean, you get an automatic 100% return on investment. So really looking at your life and seeing what you can delegate to someone else, even if you're an employee. That would be outsourcing your life. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And that's what I like about your book, because I'm going through this right now.
Yeah.
My life is just, because my audience is doubling, and in other words, the workload is doubling,
right.
Or whatever you want to call it, because
yeah.
it's not really work. It's
just volume.
Attention.
Yeah.
Well, it's attention load, right?
Yeah,
I can
exactly.
only pay attention to things for 18 hours a day,
right?
And now my day is getting sliced into thinner and thinner and thinner pieces if I want to do all the stuff that's coming to me.
Right.
even meeting with cool people, right?
Yeah. No,
it's easy to meet with one cool person a day, but
Right.
meet with 20 cool people a day or 50 cool people a day.
It's hard. It's really hard, and I mean, you really
And
nailed
how do you
it.
pick them? And how,
Yeah, it's really tough because you have to, when there's a possibility for infinite interruption and infinite minutia, you really have to develop a certain selective ignorance and really pick and choose. And but like you said, it's a matter of how much attention you have.
Yeah.
So when you're measuring your life in hours, how do you split that up and how do you allocate it? And even for me, for example, so my business is virtualized and that's running smoothly by itself. But now with this book and all this unexpected attention, at a point last week I was getting 300 email an hour. And so, how do you deal with 300 email an hour?
How do you?
Okay, so the way
because I'm in that space right now.
So I was like the coping mechanism.
Oh, by the way, if you answer them, it'll be 450.
Yeah, I know. It just that's the thing. I'm like, how do I respond so that I don't get another response?
I just answered a whole group of emails last night, and within an hour, I had double the number of emails that I answered because it causes conversations. Right. If you answer one person's email, then they see your answer, and then they bring in another person.
Right. It's a very delicate situation. So the way that I have been dealing with it is, number one, setting expectations lower and lower. And some people have an issue with that, but I feel like I need to be very upfront about what the limits of my attention and time are. So I'll say I read I'll have an autoresponder, and especially some journalists have real issues with this. But it makes it very clear that I read all my email personally, but it could take a long time for me to get back to you.
Yeah.
And that I don't do personal consultations. I'll try to help, but look at the blog, read the book first, go to the forums.
Yeah.
And the other way that I'm going to deal with that is I'm going to have two personal assistants, one in India and then one local, who will scan through my email and simply sort it for me into different folders.
Triage it.
Exactly. And so
that's sort of what I'm doing that mentally. I'm doing that right now.
Yeah.
Just to triage and say, oh, that's for my blog. That's for Podtech, which is more important. That's my boss yelling at me.
Right. Right.
that's my wife, my other boss yelling at me. Yeah. Answer that one first.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's definitely the top of the pile. So for me, it's like I have the folder structure's changed now that I have different goals with this book. So I'll have essentially reader email, and then the assistant will reply to that, get them a response so they know that I'm actually paying attention, but indicate that it could take me some time to get back. And then I'll have, let's say, media inquiries, sort of A-level media inquiries. And then
now, how did you do the auto response? So what's the technology? Because a lot of people don't know.
Okay, yeah,
like if I'm on Exchange and I can put an out of office message, right?
Right. So it's the same thing. So basically, you're taking, I think in Google it's called a vacation auto response or something like that, and you're just using it all the time. And this has caused a whole firestorm of discussion online because some people say like, oh, if I did that, my boss would fire me. If I did that, my customers would leave me. And those are really assumptions. Maybe yes, maybe no. But the way you do it is, in my personal case, I download my Gmail to Outlook so I can work on it offline. And the auto response just says, due to increased workload or just to escape the inbox and get real work done, I'm checking email at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard and 4 p.m. Pacific Standard. If you need something before one of those two times, call me on my cell phone. And so people have a way to get in touch with you. But it forces them to reassess the urgency and importance of what they're contacting you about. And I just find that people will abuse you to the extent that you let them, even if they're good people. And so it's very important to set those boundaries. And I had one at South by Southwest. So this is the first time I spoke about any of this stuff. And I was very nervous because everybody in the crowd is either on Dodgeball or Twitter or live blogging. And a radio manager came up to me from Austin. And he said, I don't think it's going to work. And I said, well, just try it. Try it for 24 hours, 48 hours, and tell me what happens. And so he set up this autoresponder, and South by Southwest is the busiest week for them. And his boss replied back, not only to him, but CC'd everyone in 5 radio stations and said, awesome time management approach, in all caps. I wish more people would implement this policy. And is every boss going to do that? No, but if you position something...
Well, those of us who have risen through the ranks at some level know that this is a problem, and we know that we need to solve it. I've talked to David Allen about this. You know, his approach works somehow, which is clean out your inbox and keep your life written down. You know, as soon as you have a thought, oh, I need to go to the grocery store and buy some milk, write that down and get it out of your head, because keeping things in your head causes you distress. Right. And actually, do you think your book goes along well with David Allen's book?
Yeah, I think that they're very compatible. You know, so I've met with you know, like Merlin, man, and he's a smart dude. He's a very smart guy, and there are a couple things that I would point out. So I think that my book addresses a very important facet of maintaining a semblance of a personal life, which is elimination. So David's book, you know, Getting Things Done, is excellent at organizing, but I think that there's a limit to how much you can consume and organize. So really eliminating as many inputs and eliminating as much information and minutiae as possible is really, really important. I think that almost takes precedence over organization. And but what you're talking about, like the open loops, closing open loops, is really important. Really important. And it's both are related to technology. So one problem that technologists have, and one problem that I had for a long time, and still have occasionally, is gadgets and gizmos that make you more efficient, but they don't necessarily make you more effective. Right? So they allow you to do really stupid, mundane things really quickly. And so for example, so Merlin and a lot of these people who follow GTD, and even
GTD is the
getting things done, right? So right, just like 4HWW, which doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well, but that's what people are calling the 4-hour work week. They're moving to note cards and pen, because, you know, technology at the end of the day is it's an appropriate tool for fixing a practical problem. And it doesn't mean that it has to have a lot of buttons and a lot of features. It could just be a note card. And so just the move towards...
Well, my schedule is on a whiteboard here. You know,
exactly.
You know, being on email or being in like an online spreadsheet like Google spreadsheet or Zoho is good, but it's also the fact of being able to put it in a public space where everybody can see it and everybody can move things around. It's sort of like a wiki, but there's something about being in ink
it really
that really causes you to focus. Like, is that really the best thing to do today? You know? And when we're on email or on the screen, you can get distracted really easily.
And I think part of that distraction is the ability to add an infinite number of items. So if I have a whiteboard, so I used a whiteboard for planning my launch strategy for the book. And
you did have a launch strategy.
Yeah, I did. I did have a launch strategy. I did have a launch strategy. But there's a
Did it just say talk to bloggers?
Talk to bloggers, underline. But there's a finite amount of space. And if you have Outlook Calendar, and I do use Outlook Calendar, but you can just continue to add in micro tasks until you have 40 items to do, and you finish 5 of them, and then 35 go to the next day, and it just accumulates, and it's not sustainable. Whereas if you're really forced, so let's see. So for example, this is what I'm using for my to-do for today, and I fold up just a piece of paper into quadrants, and I can fit 2 or 3 things on that. And it forces me to ask myself, you know, if this were the only thing I got done today, would I be satisfied with my output? And I think that if you really sit down and ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish? What is my desired outcome? There are only a few activities that really contribute the 80%. But it's very easy to get distracted if you have too many things on your to-do list.
Oh, yeah.
Very easy.
Well, I'm learning my email productivity is probably 1,000 times better when I'm on a plane.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I can't get distracted.
Yep.
Nobody can call me. Nobody can email me. More things. And in fact, I have a theory about this. There's no Google Reader items coming in, right? I can't go to Google Reader and get distracted by the blogosphere.
Yep.
And I can't go to TechMeme and get distracted by the latest news story that came out. And all I have is my email. That's it. And I have a thing. One, it's not taking my attention away from Outlook. There's nothing taking my attention away. There's no phone. There's no conversations. Yeah. I'm stuck in this small little seat. Right. All I can do is email. So it causes me to focus on it. But it also, because I can only send and I can't receive, I don't get into these conversations. Yeah. And it's the conversations that rat hole you. Oh, because like last night, I sent 100 emails and I got 150 back. Yeah. Because it's the conversation. People get your email and then they want to respond to it and want to take it into a new direction. Right. And you can just keep rat holing yourself. Oh, yeah. So doing email twice a day is brilliant, but it's really hard to. How do you do that?
So how do you?
Because my email is like dinging and.
It depends on.
And then people walk over and say, "Did you just get my email? I sent you a really important email."
Yeah, and no, it's true. And here's the thing: is there's going to be pushback because we have such a culture of immediacy, and people are taught to believe that what's urgent is important, and they're not the same. So. But I do the same thing on airplanes. So yesterday I was on an airplane, did the same thing, and I got a window seat on purpose because I'd be trapped by two people, so I wouldn't be able to procrastinate by getting up, and walking back and forth to the bathroom, getting a Diet Coke, because I think everyone has very, very poor impulse control. It's a matter of creating a good environment and a set of rules for yourself. With the email, there are going to be people who dislike the approach, and what I've found though is that you need to let a few of those urgent issues that are unimportant slip through the cracks for people to really respect the rules. Because if you set those rules and then you break them by responding to something in between, let's say 11 and 4, then no one will believe that you're actually enforcing those rules. Yeah. And since you're giving people a means to get in touch with you if it's urgent, it's a matter of conditioning them to follow those rules. And it's just like, I mean, it sounds terrible, but it's like training a dog or anyone else, including yourself. That's the hardest part. It's actually keeping yourself from working on email.
Horrible.
It's really tough.
I'm reading this book and I'm going, this is such a great life you laid out for me, but I'm not going to. And I had the same problem with David Allen's book, right? In fact, the reason you need to reread it is to sort of get, even if you pick up 10% of what's in these two books, you really make some big changes in your life.
Yeah,
right?
And it's a matter of taking very small steps and viewing them as experiments instead of permanent changes. Because if the immediate response that I get, and the knee-jerk response is, well, I can't check email twice a week or twice a day. And I mean, I check my business email for my outside book ventures once every 10 days. But that's just so extreme to most people. We start with 2 times a day. And I say, just try for one day. If it doesn't work, go back to what you were doing. But if you look at it, what's really the option? Okay, so you're checking email like once every 10 minutes now. The volume of email is just going to increase. So what's your coping strategy? You can do it every 5 minutes, then every minute. It's not scalable. So what I've found personally is really demonstrating to people that you are adhering to your own rules, number one. Number 2 is recognizing that the fastest way to make yourself miserable is trying to make everyone else happy. Because there are going to be inefficient people in your life, and they will want to impose that inefficiency on you to make themselves feel important. And so there are a handful of people, and I find it very funny that they're all journalists, but 2 people in particular who have just flamed me with long diatribes via email for my autoresponder. And the way I feel about it is, if I'm saving dozens of hours a week, and they're flaming me because they can't take 1 second to delete that extra auto-response from me, that's a trade-off I'm willing to accept. And for my own personal conditioning, though, I have a number of computers now, but I have 2 laptops that I tend to use, and one is my offline laptop. I disable all of the wireless, and so I work on that as often as possible. and then the other computer is online, but I close Outlook unless I'm checking it. Because if you leave Outlook open, especially if you have the automated notifications, especially an Audible alert,
it calls your name.
You're toasted.
If it's on, I think there's something subliminal. Hey, Robert, come and check me.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something in here for you.
It's so addictive, and you know, I've since the book came out, I've been getting all these stories from people, and there are a couple of interesting things that I've heard. So one is a VP at Morgan Stanley told me that they did some internal time audit at one point, and this was in New York, and they realized that their traders and people on the floor were getting interrupted every 3 minutes on average, and in contrast, this Swiss gentleman from Zurich came up to me at Web 2.0, and he said, it's really funny that you recommend checking email twice a day. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, because in Zurich, at the UBS office, they actually require us to check email no more than twice a day. And it was a rule. And if you look at the per hour productivity, there are a lot of ways to measure that. Like Swiss are way up here.
Yeah.
And another thing that he said to me, because this woman came up to me and she said, how do you feel about stealing American jobs and sending jobs to slave labor in third world countries? And I mean, that's a loaded, presumptuous question to begin with. It's kind of like, how do you feel about John Kerry evading enlistment? It's like, well, I didn't even say that he evaded enlistment in the first place. But the Swiss guy said to me, it's funny because you're actually in social development. And he answered the woman for me, and I didn't quite catch what he meant by that. And he said, for every job that we outsourced from Switzerland, we realized that we were taking 25 people above the poverty line. He said we had 5 people we could hire in India, and they had 5 dependents each on average. Yeah. And the Swiss person, in the meantime, would have unemployment, social services, healthcare provided for them, whereas the Indians didn't. So it was a very interesting perspective on what most people are taught is a very bad thing, outsourcing. Yeah. Well,
this valley outsources everything, right?
It does.
Come on, we had apricot. When I grew up here, there was no tech here. There was apricot orchards. We outsourced that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
We still buy apricots, right?
No, exactly.
They don't come from here.
No, exactly. And it's.
And then in my high school, I worked on a soldering wave. In fact, 3 buildings down. That was my first high school job, working on a soldering wave machine, right? Yeah. A manufacturing job. Yep. They ain't here anymore.
It's not there anymore, and I had a similar experience. And it's a global economy, and it's not like the U.S. as a sole standout island can resist it. Yeah. And so whether that means jobs flowing from one place in the U.S. to another, or flowing from San Francisco to South San Francisco, or from New York City to Bangalore.
How did we get from email to?
Oh yeah. So let's go back to so going back to email though. I set barriers and rules for myself because just like most people, if I have email in my pocket, I'm going to check it 5 times a day, at least 5 times a minute, maybe. So, I have.
Actually, that's a good thing I learned.
So I'll contrast. I'll get one for you. Hold on. So
I had a BlackBerry.
Oh, okay.
I was so addicted to it, I got carpal tunnel.
Oh, wow.
And I lost my BlackBerry, and my carpal tunnel went away in 2 days. So I will not buy a phone with a keyboard.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Because I could, in an emergency, I could still answer email on this, or send a blog on this. Yeah. But it's really hard.
It's really hard.
It's T9. I mean, any Japanese teenager could do it underneath the desk, right?
No, it's so true. And so you need to make unproductive things inconvenient for you to do. Yeah. And so I spent about 5 weeks trying to find a PDA recently, my first PDA in 5 years. And the reason it took me so long is because I was trying to find a PDA that satisfied 2 criteria. That's it. It had Outlook calendar and contacts. That's it, just for backup. And then no internet connectivity. And it was so hard for me to find a PDA without wireless connectivity. Yeah. But I knew myself well enough. If I have, let's say, e-guitar dark chocolate sitting on my kitchen table, I'm not going to have a peck at that. I'm going to sit down and eat 2 pounds of it. And if I have email in my pocket, it's the same problem. So really controlling environment as opposed to behavior, I think is really key.
So you're not on Twitter, are you?
I'm not on Twitter. And so here's the thing, right? I'm not on Twitter, but I have friends on Twitter. So if I need to spread the word on Twitter, I can go to somebody who who enjoys being on
give me a
Twitter.
call.
Oh, right, I'll give you a call. Right. Whereas for me, I know myself well enough that once I enter that world, it's going to be very hard for me to get out. So I used to play D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. I love that game, and so I was hanging out with MJ Kim and some other friends the other day, and they were playing World of Warcraft. And I've really tried to stay away from it because it's a full-time job once you get into it. And I looked at it and it was so seductive, but I have not played it because I know that I'll end up putting in 40 hours a week. No way. Like I can't.
You're gonna end up putting
like 80 hours a week. No, exactly. Like it'll be like book sales paladin 47th level. You know. But no, I'm not on Twitter at this point, and I really try to.
Facebook. Yeah, I mean Facebook, Twitter, Gaiku.
I am on.
IM? Are you on IM?
No. Well, here's the thing. I'm offline unless I'm doing, let's say, an interview via IM. So I do a lot of interviews via IM because if I do it via email, I'll spend 4 hours rewording stuff that doesn't improve the quality of what I'm responding to. So I do it on IM because it's a half hour blocked out and I'm done. But I don't have AOL. I use Gmail chat or Skype, and I force people to download it to talk to me. So again, I have that one barrier. Like if they really want to talk to me, I have a barrier to entry. And it's been a very curious experiment, sort of withdrawing from this culture of immediacy, because it's such an artificial need in many cases. Now, there's some people whose job depend on a certain degree of connectivity. Like if you're a financial trader and you've become dependent on your BlackBerry for information, well, guess what? You know, a week or two ago, when it blacks out, you're dead meat. But for most people, it's a crutch, and it's not really the lifeline that it needs to be, or that it's the lifeline that it shouldn't be, I should say.
Well, it is crack, that's for sure.
It is. And
I have 3,000 people I talk with, and when I'm on there, it's a lot of fun to talk back and forth or check in with people that you know. Like if you were on there, I'd say, "Hey, how's the book going?" And you'd say, "Hey, it's going good. I just got on another list." Or, and just that little interaction, right, saves us a lot of going to lunch and other things, and keeps us in touch, right? Keeps us a little, keeps our relationship going.
Right. So some people say, well, you're an enemy of email, an enemy of Twitter, and it's like, no, I'm not at all. I'm an enemy of excessive use of tools. So if you have almost anything positive in excess becomes its opposite, right? So you have a freedom fighter becomes a tyrant, help becomes hindrance, and you find these tools become just paralytic. I mean, they're paralyzing if they're used in excess. So it's just being able to identify that threshold that's really important for me, anyway.
Well, my job forces me to get away from this thing because I can't do Twitter when I'm actually talking to somebody.
Right.
And I can't do email, and I can't have office conversations. I mean, I see all sorts of office conversations going on right now, but I have to focus for at least half an hour to an hour a day on something, right? So, so at least I get something done, which is very satisfying about my job because I have to do a show a day.
And what I think some people might not realize about you also is, even though you have Twitter, you have all these tools, like you spend a lot of time in personal, one-on-one communication. I mean, you get out there, you travel, you talk to people in the hallways, like you said. You're not just stuck in this confine, I think that's part of the reason that you're able to have so much output, is you have that balance. Even though people see you as this online persona, like you really do have a lot of human interaction, which is cool.
Well, that's where finding a blog today it requires you to do some work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just monetize my work too. So why am I just putting the results of this cool conversation? Why not just film the conversation too and let people see that and let them see the blog post too? What are 3 rules that, if somebody didn't read your book, what are 3 things that you would suggest somebody do to get on this new lifestyle or to rethink their life? Get away from the constant pressure to do this kind of weird, meaningless answer and participate kind of world.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a couple of things that people can do right away that don't require the book at all. And I mean, there's a lot of discussion online. So if people don't want to get the book, they don't have to. But a few things that they can do is, number one, really calculate they're what I call target monthly income. So if you sit down and define what your ideal lifestyle would be, if you had $100 million in the bank, what you would spend your time doing. So doing and then having. Like if you want an Aston Martin DB9, you want to travel to Fiji once a year, you want to have X, Y, and Z relationships, own these following things. Sit down and decide and calculate what the average monthly cost is. And look at that as a financial goal. And once you exceed that, recognize that you're working for the sake of working in many cases. If you're doing something that doesn't excite you, you are deferring, you're postponing life.
Yeah.
And you need to have a very good reason why.
Yeah.
So that would be number one. That's a very effective way to shock yourself out of following the deferred life plan. Second is two things. Never check email first thing in the morning when you wake up, because you'll have a disassociated hodgepodge of ideas that'll scramble your brain for the rest of the day, at least in my experience. And so really focus on trying to accomplish your one most important task in, let's say, an hour or two before you check email. And the reason that...
that's pretty deep, because that's not intuitive.
It's not intuitive. And what happens, though, is people check email first thing in the morning. You have these unassociated requests, and you end up reacting instead of thinking. So any plans that you had for the day are immediately voided. And the reason that I set my email responding times at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. is actually, it's very conscious, because if you check email at 8 a.m. in the morning, especially if you're on the Eastern Coast, who's responding to you? You want to let that box, you want to let messages accumulate in that box, and then answer them as infrequently as possible. And so checking at, let's say, 11 right before lunch, you get messages to people. They can act on those answers in the afternoon. And then checking at either 3 or 4 p.m., you can get messages to people again before they leave work. So really trying to schedule.
That's brilliant.
It works really well. It works really well. And
my first impulse is to check the blogs, check Tech Meeting, and
yeah.
get my reader.
Okay.
And it does exactly the same thing. It gets me to react to everybody that posted something at 3 in the morning,
right.
Which usually is Mike Arrington.
Right. That's true.
So we're all reacting to
yeah,
Mike because we're little monkeys who hit our blog at 7 in the morning.
Oh man, and I used to hit send receive like a rat with a cocaine pellet dispenser, 100 times a day. That was my fix. So that would be another thing they can do to really go on a low information diet and focus on output. Another thing that I would recommend people do is just what I was mentioning before, really calculating their hourly income, because annual income is a very deceptive figure. Because you'll get a raise from, let's say, 75 to 100 grand, and that'll seem like you're being paid more, but you're actually working 30% more hours.
Yeah.
And when you break it down, you're actually getting paid less. So you look at your annual income. Let's just use 50,000 again. You chop off the last 3 zeros, cut that remaining figure in half. You make $25 an hour, and look at both time-consuming personal and business tasks, and try to identify if those can be delegated to someone else. That could be someone else in your company.
Yeah.
If you can make the case to your boss that you're paying the X number of dollars to do a task that you could pay someone $5 to do, $10 to do, or it could be to someone down the street or someone in India. And just to give you one example, when I was planning the book launch, and I was just learning, re-entering this digital world, learning about blogs and everything else, I wanted to put together an Excel spreadsheet of about 300 blogs, organized by tag on Technorati, and then cross-referenced with Alexa traffic rankings and incoming links and all sorts of things. And I assigned that at 5 p.m. one day here, and then had it in my inbox the next day at 9 a.m. And that would have taken me 200 hours. And if I'm paying someone $5 an hour to do that, it's a very, very good use of my resources. So really encouraging people to think entrepreneurially, not in the sense of business owner, but in the sense of, like J.D. Say, who originally coined the term, moving resources from low yield activities to high yield activities.
Yeah.
So you have the target monthly income, really detoxing from excessive email use, and then calculating the value of your time and seeing what you can delegate. And if you do just those 3 things, you can really create, no exaggeration, like 20, 40 hours of extra time in a given week.
Wow.
And that's just the first step. I mean, there are some pretty neat things you can do above and beyond that, but those are very simple tools that anyone can use, even in a corporate environment.
Now the hard part, because I'm thinking, man, sounds like a great world. How do you get off?
How do you get off?
Because how do you hold your finger from going to TechMeme or to Dig or to Slashdot or to News? I mean, old schoolers are probably going to Yahoo.com.
Sure.
Or,
old school.
How do you stop? How do you stop opening up Outlook and wanting to react and see if you got fired overnight?
Right.
Because that's the impulse, right?
Sure.
You want to see if something happened overnight that caused your life to change, right?
So how do you go through the withdrawal? Because withdrawal is really difficult, and it's a constant process of correction. So people ask me, they're like, well, sir, you're done? You made the decision? It's like, no, I have that impulse. It's just I'm aware of the desire to be busy instead of productive. So if you ask yourself, and I recommend people in many cases actually set, this is one of the few examples, an Outlook an Outlook reminder. So 3 times a day or twice a day, it asks them, are you being productive or are you just being busy? And I find that just having that one question in mind really helps people to separate the trivial many from the critical few. And the other thing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so what I mean by that is, so Richard Branson, right, founder of Virgin, billionaire extraordinaire, adventurer, whatever. He's been quoted in interviews as saying he can do, if he focuses on prioritizing instead of time management, he can finish all of his business-related work in about 15-20 minutes in the morning. And that's a very good example of 80-20 principle in action. So basically 20% of your activities are producing 80% of your desired outcomes, right? So it's very easy to succumb to being in constant motion because that's the expectation in most office environments. Yeah. But to control that impulse, I find that really taking a step back and asking yourself, what am I being paid for? Like, what is actually being measured? When I sit down in a performance review 6 months from now, what are the criteria they're using? And really identify the few activities that are improving whatever metrics are being measured. So I'm a big numbers guy. I'm not a fan of guessing or gambling, and it looks that way from the outside because I have these really immense, unrealistic goals that I set for myself. But I really do my homework. And this is maybe digressing a little bit, but even the title of the book, I mean, the 4-Hour Workweek, how did I come up with that? There were hundreds of potential titles. It was hell to go through these titles. I mean, you know about this.
I remember that.
It was so awful. And so, it's all this speculation, a lot of parties involved. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna do this by the numbers. So I actually used Google AdWords to test click-through rates on different titles, and reserved all the URLs in advance. And that's how I chose the title. I had the highest click-through rate. So
That's fucking brilliant.
So constantly.
Of course, I would have. I mean, we picked Naked Conversations, and you're dropping stuff, but Naked Conversations has a really high click-through rate, but not for the reason we want.
Right, the whole question of qualified traffic. Yeah, you never know though. But I'm very analytical, so I'm even though people don't look at me and they're like, oh, he's a corporate guy. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Peter Drucker and a lot of his philosophies. And one of his sayings is, what gets measured gets managed. And Arthur Jones, so I'm sort of an exercise science fanatic, right? Arthur Jones, who founded Nautilus, he said, if you can't measure it, you don't understand it. And I really believe that. Touchy-feely qualitative measurements are of very limited use. Yeah. So when I sit down with people, I'm like, look, I'm not talking about lifestyle, feel-good, let's have a home-based dog-sitting business and escape the stress of iBanking. No, I'm talking about numbers. So, for example, if you go to my website, I have this thing called Lifestyle Quotient. Yeah. And so this is another way to shock people out of their constant motion, is you input numbers like the average number of hours per week that you work, the number of vacation days that you took the previous year, and it tells you how many hours you're working for each day of vacation that you take. And it's a frightening number for most people.
Right.
So
most people don't take vacation. I know people who've literally never taken a vacation. Right?
No, and it's this badge of honor. Yeah. You know, it's like who can have less of a life competition in the U.S. Like, I can't leave before my boss. I can't leave before person X because I want to put in my time, and that's a suicide mission. It's really just destined for a breaking point and meltdown. And you know, I'm just hoping that people out there who are doing everything right, you know, they're intelligent, they're putting in their time, they're working hard. I'm hoping that they're able to see that there are other options outside of sort of the A or B that are presented to people. Yeah. And
well, you just said something scary. You know, putting in less time than your boss. That if you work in a big company or even a small company, right, like a startup, you know, that's a hard thing to get your hands around, because because you want to be seen as a, you know, a member of the team, a productive person, or somebody who puts in the hours. You know, when you see somebody who's not putting in the hours, that people whisper in the hallways, "Hey, that guy's never here." You know, they even say that about me, even though I'm traveling the world and talking. Right? No, that guy's not putting in his hours in the office. You know,
and that's it's very common. But there are very simple workarounds. So if you have to get very good, if you're in a corporate environment, at managing laterally and managing up.
What do you mean by
what I mean by that is, even though you might have colleagues, coworkers, and superiors, getting very good at setting your own work environment rules to the greatest extent possible and conditioning those around you and above you to more or less follow the same rules. And the nutshell of approach to doing that is training people to respect performance over presence, right? And so you have to try to identify how you can demonstrate productivity aside from just sitting in a cubicle within sort of visible striking distance of your boss. And so the way that I've done that, and I've had plenty of jobs before, is really providing a paper trail and showing superiors what you're doing and what results you're bringing in. And so, for example, when I had my first job here in Silicon Valley, I was in technical sales for a storage area networking company, and they basically just gave me a phone book and they're like, start with A, and it was not efficient or effective, neither. And I ended up booking more meetings than a lot of the senior sales guys because I made my phone calls between 8 a.m. and 8:30, so when the gatekeepers hadn't yet arrived, and then I made most of my calls from like 6:30 to 7 when they'd already left. So I was able to get to the people to actually make the appointments. And so when we had our weekly meetings, and it was like, wow, okay, well, you know, here's Tim's roster of meetings, and then there's salesperson X roster of meetings. That on a weekly basis erased any question of how many hours I was putting in, because I was producing what was measurable. And whenever you're negotiating, let's say, remote work agreement or flex time or anything like that, you need to again think entrepreneurially and position it as a business solution, as an advantage to the company as opposed to a personal perk. And I think it's hard for people. Like, I'm really stressed out, I want to take 2 days off per week to work at home. That's not compelling. No. But if, you know, I worked this weekend and I got twice as much done because I didn't have constant IM pings and I wasn't getting a phone call every 3 minutes. And look, I actually was able to produce twice as many billable hours for clients in half the time it usually takes me during the week. And it cut down on back and forth between coworkers, which cuts down on your workload, superior, because you don't have to govern the entire process. That's compelling. So there are workarounds. It's just a matter of presentation.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's fun. Thanks so much.
Hopefully I can use 10% of it. Because, I mean, you know, every little bit, it has radical changes in your life. But I certainly need to practice some of what you're preaching.
Well, no, I mean, it's the small things are the big things. You know, just like in relationships, as in life, as in work, it's the small things that sometimes have the biggest effects. So just these tiny little changes can have huge repercussions. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So what do you do with all your free time?
I am dying to go to Russia, actually, and to train with a guy named Fedor Emelianenko, who's undefeated Pride heavyweight champion in mixed martial arts. So I want.
That's right. That's your whole other life. Right?
Yeah, that's my alter ego.
I'm not messing with you, man.
So that's one thing I'm doing, and then I'm also trying to help a not-for-profit that a former classmate of mine runs called DonorsChoose.org, which is partially funded by Pierre Omidyar. Okay. And the Omidyar Foundation, and
he's the guy who started eBay.
Yeah, exactly. And they're bringing essentially private financing from individuals to every public school teacher in the U.S. for materials and field trips and projects, things like that. So I'm hoping through the book, because I'm giving a good chunk of the royalties to that group, to help them go national, which is what they're trying to do. So those are my two projects right now.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming out and talking to me.
My pleasure, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the book.
Oh, yeah. My pleasure. Cool. Thanks.